The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast ahead of the start of the November International Series this weekend. It is Ireland taking on Japan at the Aviva Stadium. And to go through the team and the likely outcome of the game itself, I'm delighted to be joined by Donal Lenihan, Bernard Jackman and Wes Liddy, as always, on the podcast. You're welcome, gentlemen. We have the team. And I'd like to say it's surprising, and there's a few exciting features, Donal Lenihan, to get worked up about, but it's pretty much as expected. There's nothing really to shout home about. I'm a little bit underwhelmed. I don't know if that's being unfair to Andy Fowler and the squad, but I thought there might be more new faces to talk about. But it's quite, as you were, quite familiar at the moment.
Yeah, it is. Look, there's a lot of interesting combinations, not least to the back row. Personally delighted that Ronan Kelleher gets his start. I think he's benefited hugely from his exposure on that Lions tour. Surprised James Lowe is on the wing, I have to say, given the other contenders that were there. And surprised there seems to be a kind of a get out of jail card just in case with, selections of, a lot of players on the bench. But look, I think really you got to look at it in the context, and this is maybe a discussion for another day. But when I look at the way the fixture calendar is going, where on one hand you have the four provinces who don't have a game for 5 weeks while the URC is off. And then on the other hand, you have an international calendar that's flagged months and months in advance. And we seem to be, all our top players, certainly all our Lions, have little or no game time going into, a key element of the season. Conor Murray, 21 minutes played. I think Tyke Furlong, 1 or 2 little cameo appearances. I just think it's daft. I mean, this is the showcase of the game. It's international rugby. Thankfully, we could have sellout crowds for 3 games at the Aviva Stadium. And a lot of our key players are way short of game time. I just don't get it.
Oh, well, this is an Irish thing, though. Look at the Gallagher Premiership across the water. The Lions players have been back for the last month. I mean, it's exclusively an Irish problem.
Yeah, look, it's something, I suppose, it goes back 10 or 15 years to the whole time management thing, which was great, and it served Ireland well at the time. But I think, look, there is a wider issue at play here. Like, you look at the season now, the old Pro 14 as it was, the Gallagher Premiership, their finals were always in the end of May. You had the top 14 in France was the only final that went into June. Now, without anybody saying anything, those finals are all extended into the middle or end of June, which means players go away. Ireland have a 3-test tour going into July, which means it's August by the time they come back. So you're always kind of rushing for these November internationals. But look, as I say, it's probably a debate for another day. But I think unless, and when you have all our so many interests in rugby now, not least, venture capitalists coming into the game, unless we get this thing aligned, it's just a mess, really, for me at the moment.
Well, let's just talk about it for a minute, because it is an interesting point in the context of the team this weekend as well. I mean, to say Tyke Furlong has played very little rugby, Conor Murray virtually none, Tyke Byrne is only just back. The last couple of weeks, I suppose. But Birch, the players do seem to be treated as cattle products here, being kind of herded from game to game to game. And I heard somebody during the week, I can't remember, I think it was on Off the Ball News Talk, make the comparison about the NFL. Like, American football players are in a truncated short season. They have, how many games, 20 games, and that's it, and they're done and have a large break. Such is the level of physicality in the sport that the players need that recuperation time. The same is not afforded to rugby, and this is just heading for, I think they're heading for troubled waters here.
Yeah, they are, and look, we're probably lucky here that we can kind of pull them out when we need to, because it's all centrally contracted. But there was a push to align the global season that fell through. The problem, it's very difficult. And now I know what Donal is saying. Now you have CVC money, private equity money, but in some ways that even adds to the complications of trying to get a more logical global season or international player season, because they've invested in rugby to turn a profit. You know what I mean? So I don't know where the solution to this is, but I would totally agree with Donal. It's far from ideal. I mean, look, just to add another layer to this, I mean, the Welsh game last week against New Zealand, outside the test window, it earned, I think, $2 million for the All Blacks, $4 million for Wales. So short term, yeah, it gives both parties an improved bank balance. But I would wonder, how many Welsh fans driving home from Cardiff last Saturday night felt shortchanged, and there's only so much. Look, the All Blacks are always a great draw, but you want to have your best players playing against them. So the All Blacks went to America, played an exhibition game, got a million or whatever for that. Didn't really do the USA or rugby in America. I don't think a huge amount of benefit in terms of a positive PR exercise. And then obviously, I think the Wales game damages rugby in Wales long term, even though short term it's a benefit. And look, it's difficult. Wales have players playing outside of Wales, and those English clubs wouldn't release them, etc. But just the whole calendar at the moment is far from ideal, and I would agree with Donal, it needs to be looked at.
Okay, Wesley, your thoughts on the team? Just to give you the pack, first of all, if we can concentrate on the pack for a minute. So Andrew Porter, Ronan Kelleher and Tadhg Furlong in the front row, Tadhg Byrne, James Ryan in the second row, Caelan Doris, Van der Fleer and Jack Conan in the back row. The back five from 4 to 8, Wes, is probably one of the most mobile 5 forwards we've had in our Irish team for quite some time, which I'm hoping would lead to a kind of a fast-paced, frenetic kind of style of rugby to match what is the pace in that back row, particularly in the second row as well, with Byrne and James Ryan. Would you be confident that will materialise on Saturday afternoon?
You'd hope. I think I probably wouldn't agree that it's a very safe, predictable selection, to be honest. Some of the changes, if you look at the pack, some of the changes are well flagged, so to speak, with the likes of Porter being at Loosehead. But it's still a brave call. It's still a new departure. It's still
it's not really. Andrew Porter at Loosehead at international is not really a brave call, is it?
I think it's setting their stall out for what they're trying to do, and I think they're acknowledging a problem with a lack of size and a lack of dynamism that they've maybe had in the pack at times. I think there's a couple of sacred cows that have been left out, Peter O'Mahony being one, Ian Henderson arguably to a lesser extent, so they were brave enough calls. I think there's huge athleticism with Van der Fleer, Doris and Conan. There's not massive size, but they're all good carriers, they're all powerful. And I suppose Bert wrote a piece about Japan at the weekend that was very interesting and kind of centered on this clear identity and philosophy they have and how they want to play the game. And it's very public knowledge at this point. And I would hope that forward selection for Ireland at least hints at the start of a process where this current team's identity and philosophy is going to become clear, because up to this point, I think it's been a bit mix and gather them kind of.
Yeah, that was my point.
I think that's a good point on the basis that, look, we have seen it time and time again over the years that, especially come World Cup time, we can play the bashing game, the high physical stakes game, maybe once or twice in a window. If we have to do it 2 or 3 weeks in a row, we're just not up to it. We've seen time and again the likes of England, South Africa, France even, just being too powerful for us. So I do think if the move of Porter to Loosehead is the start of looking for more forwards who are more comfortable with the ball in hand, I think, with the likes of Kelleher developing the way he is and Dan Sheehan, I think that's a significant addition to the bench as well. We've seen what he can do for Leinster. So it does hint with Tadhg Byrne in the second row, it does hint that maybe we are looking to, just to play a little bit more, look to put more of those tip-on passes on board and challenge teams by keeping the ball as opposed to kicking it away all the time, which, let's be honest, is what we have done for the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Play a tempo, Donal, I think.
Exactly. And I'd be a huge fan of Ian Henderson. I think you put him into the mix as well. But I mean, the key is, as we all know, you've got to have 5 forwards at least on the bench who are capable of continuing that. That's the one thing with New Zealand. You see all the time, the guys that they bring in with 20, 25 minutes, they all add something else, but they're all able to do the basics of the game so well. So I think that it is an attempt to add 1 or 2 more layers to our team. And if that's the case, then well and good. Now, the only thing you have to be careful against Japan, because the last thing you want to do is try and take them on in a game that suits them way better because, as we know, they look to keep the ball and play longer than anybody else. So I think it's an element of getting the balance to your game right.
Yeah, but does the result matter, Donal? What I'm saying by that is, like, would you not rather?
You asked me that, Hugh. You asked me that when we did the commentary for Japan and Ireland last July, and I'll give you exactly. It certainly matters to Andy Farrell, and it does matter. Of course, it matters. If Ireland were to start their 3-game sequence of matches with a defeat to Japan, what will we be talking about on this thing next week? Come on.
Well, I tell you what.
Of course, it matters.
My point is, Bernard.
It matters if you lose, Hugh, more than if you win, I think.
Well, I tell you what I want to see for the next 3 tests in Ireland. I really don't care about the results either way, 3 ways. I want to see an Ireland team with what Wes mentioned, Bernard, is an identity, a shape to the game plan that we are going to be implementing over the next 3 weeks. So we can say, all right, okay, this is what Andy Farrell and the lads are at. This is our attacking shape now. This is what we're building for the next couple of years. And this is the Ireland stamp, if you like, that we're taking to the international game. I'd much rather be able to come out of the next 3 international match days with a clearer vision of what they're actually trying to do, rather than getting 3 wins on the bounce. That's my.
Yeah, no. Look at. I think I would agree that this is a very, very good Irish pack on paper, but the Man United team on paper is very good at the moment as well. But it's hard to see what they're trying to do, and bar having Ronaldo get him out of trouble every second game. So like that's the question mark. So I think the coaches have been there long enough now, and they've created a really nice environment. Everyone loves being in camp. For me, it's the bench that's maybe a little bit frustrating in terms of, it's a very, very experienced bench. And like, was that an opportunity to maybe give some more players? Like we know what Cian Healy can do. Yeah. We know what Peter Manny can do. I can understand Conor Murray because maybe he wants to get 20 minutes into Conor Murray and he's part of his plan to start next week. But also I would say if James Gibson Park is your starting 9, which I don't know who's Andy Farrell's first choice 9. He does like Gibson Park, that's for sure. But is he going to play Gibson Park against New Zealand because he thinks Gibson Park is the man to threaten around the fringes, to play high tempo, to put the likes of Andrew Porter, Ronan Kelleher on the front foot, Caelan Doris? Like, it's a pack built with lots of ball carriers. But I don't think static ball is going to be good enough against the All Blacks. I think the 9 needs to probe and create holes. And if that's the case, well, then Casey should be on the bench because you're going with two like for like. So I think it's. I wonder how tough Farrell is in terms of selection, and is this the group that are going to go to the World Cup, regardless of kind of current form, etc. Like for me, Gavin Coombs, could he not be on the bench this weekend? And could he not bring more impact? And that's not right enough. That's not right enough, Peter Manny. If Faz thinks Peter Manny is the man we need to be able to beat the All Blacks next week, and we're going to go after him at the breakdown, we're going to go after him at defensive lineouts, etc. I could totally understand that. But the question I'm trying to figure out is, what's the value of having, how many caps we have on the bench, over 300 caps on the bench. Yeah. And is that, like, given there's only 3 tests, I just think, I wouldn't criticize the starting team too much. I would definitely have questions around the bench that I think we could have been a little bit braver there.
The bench is...
Yeah, I think the thing that annoys me most, Hugh, is that we're still at this thing of giving the newer, younger fellas their caps against the likes of the USA or Japan. And no, Japan are for me, they are a tier 1 country, even though they're classified as tier 2. But I just don't see the point in it. What do you learn putting them out against the USA? Or no, at least in this window, you've 3 really good teams. Like Argentina may not have won a match. I think they lost all 6 games in the Rugby Championship, but they'll be battle hardened. They'll be a difficult side to play against. So therefore, the likes of your Gavin Coombeses and these guys, you definitely would learn something by exposing them to the likes of Argentina. But look, I mean, we're giving out as well about, just remember, we were supposed to be playing the USA in Las Vegas last week, but that was only called off because of COVID. So we might have had an excuse then play a load of fellas against USA, who we saw was an MSL team. New Zealand scored 104, 16 tries against them. So, I mean, the biggest problem I have all the time is we get to the World Cup and the guys who are on the fringe, they've never got exposure against the really, like France, New Zealand, Australia, or England. The guys who will test you when you're in the knockout phase of the World Cup. And that is something like Andy Farrell has suggested. Johnny Sexton came out during the week. There seems to be a different emphasis for the first time. Remember, he's been through 3 World Cup cycles already. They're now mentioning the World Cup. They're not just looking down. Well, we're told at least that the World Cup, that everything they're doing now is with the World Cup in focus. Well, where does that manifest itself? Surely it should be in selection.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I look at it as well. You know, Jemison Gibson Park. I don't know. As Bernard said, Andy Farrell clearly, you know, thinks very highly of him. He's not first choice at Leinster most of the time, yet he's, you know, seems to be pushing for first choice with the Irish setup. And then, like Craig Casey and Gavin Coombs between them have been man of the match for the majority of Munster's games in the URC so far this season. Yet neither even makes the bench. That's where my frustration with this. When I say the same old tired old, I'm predominantly looking at this bench and I'm saying Cian Healy, you know, Ian Henderson, Peter O'Mahony, Conor Murray, Keith Earls. We know exactly what they can do. We know exactly what they can do for the last 10 years. Why are we not seeing younger guys be given a chance? It's frustrating for some people.
Yeah, I think both of those guys, Coombs and Casey, should probably be involved. Like as Bert said, you know, he's got, say, for argument's sake, he's got Peter O'Mahony in there because he feels he's going to need him next week in terms of attacking the New Zealand line out or breakdown or whatever it may be. Like, as much as a win over New Zealand is massive anytime, like it's only happened, twice, and it's huge for confidence, and it probably, I suppose it gives this team a real sense of momentum if they get the win, but equally, I mean, we beat New Zealand 2 years out from a World Cup, the last World Cup cycle, and it amounted to absolutely nothing come the World Cup. So I wouldn't be going against a long-term plan for the sake of a short-term gain if it's a marginal call between the two, I suppose I'm saying.
Donal, did you want to come in on that? Sorry, no?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say beating them 2 years out from the last World Cup didn't do us any good when we got to the quarter-final the last time.
That's exactly my point, yeah.
I mean, if anything, it put them on notice. Look, this crowd, if we're not tuned in, are capable of creating damage. But look, I know New Zealand have a greater strength and depth than anybody else, but they keep losing players to Europe. How many former All Blacks in their mid to late 20s are playing in Europe? Yet, I went through their squad. They've been away, bear in mind, since the last week of August. They haven't been able to go back to New Zealand when the Rugby Championship completed. They had to stay there in camp before they went to America. They have 40 players on their tour. Some of the back row forwards they have, like your new names. I'm talking about, you know, if you look at the guys like obviously Sam Cane and Artie Surveyor were there last time out, but like Ethan Blackadder, Shannon Frizzell, Akira Iwoni, Luke Jacobson, Dalton Papali'i, Hoskins Satutu. All these guys have emerged in the last 12 to 18 months, and all of them have got exposure against first-class opposition. That, for me, is the key difference. They're building a squad come next World Cup. I mean, it's frightening. You look at like Dane Coles and Cody Taylor, 2 experienced hooker. They have your man Amua and Takiaha, 2 incredibly exposed of young fellas coming in behind them. This is their planning 2 years out. And that, to me, is the difference between being able to negotiate your way through the knockout phase and repeatedly competing at World Cups compared to where we've been since forever. We've never got to a semi-final.
Yeah, well, you know, on the plus side for Ireland, Donal, I mean, Johnny Sexton could be making his 150th cap by the time the World Cup is around. He'd be 38 years of age. So, you know what I mean? That's the flip side of us. I can understand Sexton saying until after the Six Nations is going to decide about the World Cup, because then it's only a year away. And sure, if he's still playing, it's more than likely. I guess he's taking a game by game. Yeah,
Hugh, just something a bit deeper rooted problem. In terms of where we are is if you look at the starting team, how reliant we are on the Leinster production line. Okay, and David Newsfore has been on the record saying, "Oh, we're too reliant on the schools, etc." But there's no evidence of that changing. Our club side went to Italy last week and got heavily beaten by Italy. I think it was 44 points to a single figure. And this team, I mean, bar Gibson Park, James Lowe, and Bundy Aki. The rest have all come through the Leinster system, and all of them bar Ty Furlong have come through the school. So for all the talk about IQ. So we have this team looking in England for talent, for all talk about sevens. The reality is we're still where we were. In actual fact, we've become more reliant on the Leinster production system than we were 10 years ago, when we had a kind of a balance of Munster, Leinster, a more Ulster contingent, and the odd Connacht player. So that's something, it hasn't been by design. We're trying to get away from being reliant on it, but for whatever reason, we failed to change our production line. In actual fact, we've become more reliant than before, and one Ulster player in the 23, and that's something that's either it's good or bad for Irish rugby. I would say it's not ideal, to be honest, but it's just something to think about when you look at that team, in terms of where we're getting our players from. And I know the population bias is here. And we have mentioned guys like Casey and Coombs, who we think could definitely be in the 23. But we are very, very much overly reliant, and that's not Leinster's fault or those players' fault or where they're produced fault. But we haven't done a huge amount to keep up or catch up. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, lads. Just plenty of other stories I want to talk about, if you don't mind. Birch, did you go up against Carl Hayman in your time in Grenoble over when he was playing with Toulon there? Did you have any experience with him?
I had a few beers with him post-match, and we had some mutual friends from the Highlanders. Obviously, he went to Poe then, and he had some difficulties off-field as a coach. I think the signs, look at what, it was certainly talked about in the game a little bit that he was struggling, and his behaviour certainly changed in Poe. He was a very quiet man, and he started to be a little bit erratic. And he's come out this week and spoke about those changes. I don't think I ever played against him, but I certainly got to know him. A very likable guy, part of that Toulon team that changed Toulon's history and became successful. And it's terrible to see what he's going through now, and also I don't know if people picked up on it, but there's a contingent of rugby league players of the same generation, well, maybe a bit older, Bobby Goulding and co, who would have been on TV when I was growing up, and they've also put together a group to take a claim against the rugby league authorities around concussion. So it's scary how prevalent it seems to be in my generation, and obviously the generation before that, and scarily, I think the physicality's gone up massively. So, it could be something that's going to come down the track in a bigger way.
It looks like it will. I mean, it's pretty frightening stuff, really. As far as he's concerned, 41 years of age. He's spoken about getting an interview. He's been diagnosed with early-onset dementia, and he spoke about the personality change that he's gone through. He got incredible headaches. He was forgetful. He was at a situation where he went to renew his son's passport, and he couldn't remember his son's middle name. And he was on the phone trying to get it renewed, and he had to apologise to the person at the other end of the phone in the passport office, saying, "Sorry, I can't remember my son's name." As he said, he had a domestic violence incident for which he had a suspended jail sentence for that. He's spoken about that in this interview. It's a very frank interview. But Donal, early onset dementia at the age of 41 must be a wholly frightening and unsettling experience for someone like him. And look, as I guess he's joined this class action suit that Bernard mentioned there as regards to World Rugby and Rugby Union, and that seems to be growing. But it is just another sobering reminder, I guess, of the dangers that come with this very physical sport that we love.
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely a legacy of that period there, 7, 8, 10, 12 years ago, when the focus, you had the macho image around concussion. Where it wasn't seen as a serious injury, where it was seen as almost a weakness if you went off because, some of the symptoms, okay, you felt you were all right within a minute or 2 minutes of getting a bang. I think we have a far greater understanding of what's involved now, but it must be quite frightening for players of that generation who finished up in the last 7 or 8 years. Can you imagine, and we all get a little bit forgetful at times, but could you imagine for somebody in that age bracket who, starts getting forgetful and he's beginning to worry then, oh God, am I a victim of this? Do I have dementia, or is it something that's coming down the track? I mean, it's something that's been hanging over World Rugby. The RFU, I know, were sort of making contingency plans for this a number of years ago. The Steve Thompson case and that class action against the Rugby Union and the Welsh Rugby Union hasn't come to 4. I'm not sure. I think it's due to come up in the next 6 months, but it has massive implications for the game. And it is frightening just how physical the game has got. Even, all players at all levels, even club players now, you see lads coming out of school, they're way bigger and stronger than they've been at any stage before. And the collisions, even in club rugby, can be quite impactful. But look, I think, to be fair, there's been a lot of focus on this area in the past 2 or 3 years. Medical teams within the professional setup have got a lot better, but still the collisions are such that you just feel it may reduce the cases, but it's definitely not going to eliminate it. So look, I think this story and the fallout from that Carl Hayman stuff during the week, it was frightening. It was like watching, the Concussion film on the NFL when it came out first, similar mood-changing things with former NFL players, how it affected them and their families off the field. So it's a mirror image of what we saw in LFN a number of years ago. So that really is a worry.
And I remember that, I guess the case around the NFL at the time, Dr. Bennett O'Mallow, I think his name was, who kind of led the charge in developing CTE, what we now know to be concussion, if you like. Aina Falvey, Wes, has spoken about this as well, about the World Rugby and what they have done to kind of make the game safer and what they are constantly doing and reviewing to try and make sure players' safety is at the fore. It'd be interesting from a legal perspective, though, how much weight is given to what World Rugby knew and could have done at the time versus what they have been doing, and where the fault lies in a lawsuit such as this. You'd wonder where the law will come down in determining, how much culpability World Rugby had in terms of what they knew and what they could have done back in the day, because this is all relatively new, I think.
Well, you'd hope that Donald's point proves to be true, that obviously Carl Hayman would have played the bulk of his career in a period maybe just immediately before things started to be heavily legislated this way, and it's not any solace to him or anyone else, but you would hope maybe steps have been taken that these things don't become more and more prevalent despite the growing physicality, because different laws have been tweaked around it. But like on a human side, like it's absolutely sickening, like the thought of 41-year-old with dementia. Like I've an elderly parent with dementia, and like it's alien to think of someone at that age with it. Brilliant player, highest paid player in the world at one point. Probably didn't get the full kind of credit he deserved, I suppose, because he moved on from the All Blacks before they kind of broke that World Cup hoodoo. But I think in New Zealand he'd probably be regarded as the best tight head that's ever played for New Zealand. So just goes to show you it can be anyone. And like the NFL one is a difficult comparison, because in a lot of ways the NFL is almost like a blood sport. Some of the things that goes on around the laws of tackle techniques, around bounties and games that we've heard about, just the sheer physicality of it. But as you say, players are playing for 30-second spurts in the NFL in a 16-game season, whereas rugby is week in, week out over a 9-month period. So it probably, even though the impact isn't as big, the risk probably starts to become just as big by sheer volume of exposure to these kind of incidents. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, we'll watch and see as the case progresses. But you just send your thoughts out to Carl Hayman. But it's terrific stuff, as he said.
Just on a lighter note, Hugh, he was famous when he played for Newcastle. The Highlanders and Otago are sponsored by Spate Lager. I don't know, any of you ever been to New Zealand might have drank it. And he used to send him, he was an ambassador, he used to send him a crate of Spate Lager a year, and he used to have these famous garage parties. So whenever Newcastle's a long bus trip, but if you could get an invite after the match back to Carl's garage for a few free cans of Spate, it was legendary. So he enjoyed he's old school off the field as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, brilliant. Eddie Jones, Birch, I'll just kick off with you on this one, because he's been in the newspapers. Well, one paper in particular seemed to have a right go from over the last couple of weeks, so much so that in interviews he's kind of had to, I guess, defend himself a little bit against what are seemed to be quite gruff tactics. The article itself in question, the Times, talked about a huge amount of staff turnover because his methods of coaching and his work ethic is so severe that people actually can't stay for any sustained period of time before they just burn out completely. You know, John Mitchell's gone back to New Zealand, the famous story about him wanting to go and see his son play a cricket match, and Eddie Jones didn't take too kindly on it, despite the fact that everybody was on a day off. But look, Eddie Jones, you know, in this particular article, seems to have a right vendetta against him and his coaching methods. I have to say, I've always found him to be quite curt. I've always enjoyed his mannerisms with the press, which is quite straight. And I think at the end of the day, if you're judging his CV, it's not a bad CV for a head coach to have, is it?
No, he's phenomenally successful in terms of results, and you know, some people might argue how long that style lasts, but I think it's a bit harsh on him, to be honest. I think he has done a very good job in England, results wise. He is very hard on staff. Those stories in the industry are notorious. I mean, emails at 2:30 in the morning looking for something done by 5:30, and fellas coming down for breakfast, and he's asking them, "Have you got that done for me?" And they're like, "What?" I went to bed at 1:00 and there was no request. But that's the way he is. He's not like lying in bed himself. You know, he's absolutely all action, and he's reinvented himself so many times. It's probably hard to keep up with him if you're a support staff, to be honest. And John Mitchell has gone to Wasps as director of rugby, and you know, there was definitely tension there at the end. But having said that, guys like Scott Wisemantle, who I know is now with Australia, you know, worked for him in a club in Japan, worked for him with Japan, worked with him in England. You know, it depends on the personality you are, I suppose, how sensitive you are to being called out or questioned. And the reality is, you know, some of the most successful teams have been driven by autocratic leadership like that. And obviously, you know, at the moment, it's all about empowerment and happy environment and psychological safety. And I'm not against that at all. But the reality is that, you know, Eddie Jones he's obviously trying to reinvent himself, but he has clear philosophy around how hard the support staff need to work, what kind of attitude players need to have. And, you know, he got 80 minutes away from a World Cup with England. Obviously, they had a difficult season last year, but like, look at how open he was to that review process. I mean, England did a full review after a poor Six Nations. Eddie was questioned and had to agree to change in certain areas, which is, again, you know, it's counter to what we're being portrayed to him as being an absolute psychopath. So, yeah. And also look at those English players, you know, the likes of Owen Farrell, etc. They all have enough standing in the game to get Eddie removed if they don't believe he's the man to lead them. There's no doubt. So I think, look, it's interesting. It sells papers. People like talking about it. It fits into the smart ass impression we get him in press conference, etc. He is hard on journalists, you know, and that's not smart. If you know, they obviously wait for a few bad results to get you back. But I think there's no one as hard on him or as open to review as Eddie is, and the things he's done badly. He's come out. He was interviewed last week on BT, and he said, yeah, he has made mistakes, you know, but his sole purpose is to make the team better. And I think the people who understand that will get on the bus.
Yeah, I heard that interview on BT. Matt Williams is very good on this, Donald. Matt Williams said, like, Eddie Jones has been described as old school, as some sort of, criticism of him, that this term old school is actually like a derogatory term. And Eddie Jones, what the hell are you talking about? And actually, Matt was very good at saying, hang on, old school just means a certain type of value system that has, you know, actually served him very well over the years. And he has been new school enough to change his ways whenever rugby has needed, and actually has been ahead of the curve on many occasions, at the forefront of actually predicting curves in the game of rugby union throughout the years. And his CV, as I said, speaks for itself. How do you see him overall? What's your view on Eddie Jones?
Well, I think, look, you have to admire him, certainly from afar. I look at what he's done in the game. I mean, he was, you know, brought Australia to a World Cup final, brought England to a World Cup final. He was on the staff of South Africa in 2007 when they won the World Cup final. I think the key issue here is his own personal work ethic and his desire and drive in his, like, he's nearly 60 years of age, yet he is more hungry to improve himself than any coach of that era. When you talk about old school, I think Matt Williams is right. If you look who are the best coaches in the world over the past 5, 6, 7 years, you're looking at the likes of Graham Henry, Steve Hansen, Eddie Jones. all guys who are in their late 50s to early 60s who've experienced the game. Now, I do think the dynamic of the young players has changed now. A lot of them, everything has been so prescribed to them coming up through the academy systems and all that. Some of them can take the tough love, if you like. And I do think you have to have a balance. And it must have been even more difficult over the last 18 months when you have COVID and you have teams and players operating in a very tight bubble. So when you can't get a break from that. But, I was interested when Bert said that, Eddie Jones, he came in, they did have a review after the World Cup as to what went wrong. Obviously, the England camp doesn't seem to have been the happiest place in the world to be part of. But I don't know whether you saw, John Bartley had an article in the Times this morning where he's talking about Richard Cochrane. Now, Richard Cochrane has just been brought in by Eddie Jones as his new forwards coach. And John Bartley spoke about how parking the car in Murrayfield for training with Edinburgh in the morning, he dreaded going into work because Richard Cochrane was brutal, rude and aggressive. So is he the good cop that's been brought in to match Eddie Jones's bad cop? I saw Lawrence Delalios wrote about it in the Times where he said, look, I mean, it must be horrific to be involved in an environment like that. Now, you flip it. The Irish environment seems to be fantastic. Everybody loves Andy Farrell. They all seem to get on great.
Yeah.
But you wonder, could they do with a bit of tough loving? Look, it's a question of balance. It's also a question of it only has a limited time span. And I told you the story before about the two IRB officials who said to me after the World Cup, and I suggested Eddie Jones will be a loss to Japan after 2015 when they beat South Africa. He said, absolutely no way. 4 years is the max that you could take working with him. Obviously, his methods are a means to an end, but he's now gone into year 5 and 6 in England. And you just wonder, is that one of the issues there? But certainly, Richard Cockrell, when you're talking about old school, you ain't going to get more old school than him. So it'd be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, it was funny actually. During lockdown, he came on at a coaching webinar, and he was brilliant. But at the end, he took some question and answers, and one of the coaches said to him, Eddie, just give us one tip. And they were expecting, obviously, a tactical or a technical bit of advice. He goes, get a dog. He goes, even when your wife hates you, all the players hate you, the coaches hate you, you go home, the dog wags its tail and gives you a lick, whatever. So that was his solution to not being loved. But
would you put Steve Diamond in that kind of bracket as well?
Diamond was tough for sure. But
but he has 6 dogs, I think.
Yeah. But Diamond will be back in the game. And Eddie Jones, if it doesn't work out with England, he'll find a good job and he'll be successful. Have no fear.
A dog for each day of the week. Wesley, I put it to you that you and I would never survive in a squad under Eddie Jones. What do you reckon about that? You'd be too soft.
You certainly wouldn't anyway, but it might bring out the best of me, Hugh. I don't know. Needed a bit of tough love.
Yeah. What do you think of Jones? I mean, I have to, like, the Times piece I thought was a complete hatchet job, and we know the guy who wrote it. I'm not going to name him, but I just thought it was absolutely
it's not whatever about the interpersonal stuff, like the workaholic demand and standard stuff, like I wouldn't find that one bit surprising. Like, I mean, anyone who has to control a group of people is going to have some autocratic tendencies, particularly a group of professional sportsmen who are generally full of testosterone and egomaniacs to boot. So you have to be able to shout the odds every now and again, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, he's no Tony Grant, Hugh. Donal will get that reference now. There's an autocrat for you now, I tell you.
Come here. What about the cookies, Wes, before we leave it? Beating Lansdowne the last time. I watched the highlights up on... It's brilliant that Irish Rugby on their Twitter feed put up the highlights of the AIL games to watch it. So if you don't get to go to the matches, as more often than not, if you're working on other stuff at the weekend, you see it. That winger you have, 14, I don't know what his name, but he scored an absolutely cracking try at the weekend. A win against Lansdowne at the Aviva. I mean, looks like you lads are here to stay, or here to fight for the long haul. What do you reckon, Wes?
Yeah, I was talking to Birch about that lad during the week. Conor Hayes is his name. He's his father was a fairly good club player with All Crescent and Munsters years ago. He was actually in my daughter's class in school, and he was playing Ireland Youths at the time. So I've been kind of watching him for a few years, and he got a crack at the pro game, and it didn't work out a few years back with Connacht. and he's gone away. He's actually finished a law degree, and he's kind of he's grown up. He's obviously kept training because he's built like a Polynesian every time I've seen him anyway. So he looks a serious player, great feet, great pace, hat trick there against Lansdowne. Like, to me, he looks like a guy that's could easily adjust to pro rugby. I was saying to Birch, I nearly wonder it kind of goes against pro sport and competitiveness in a way, but should there nearly be a situation where there are a number of, say, 3 guaranteed contracts to be handed out into the professional game in Ireland to go to 3 AIL players every year as an incentive?
I'd say if you're going to do 4. So each province has to reward somebody as a late developer. I think it'd be great for the league. I think it's great to see more players playing on a weekly basis. I think it is brilliant as well that those little highlight clips are going up on IrishRugby.ie. But having said that, there's English scouts looking at them as well, and he certainly caught the eye. So that's something, maybe a byproduct of it. But yeah, I would love to see a space for a late developer. I think, that example, a guy who was in the system, fell out of it, went and got his law degree, has continued to look after himself, looks to have progressed. That Lansdowne Munster game was very high quality. Wow. There was lots of guys who will be pros or have been. There was guys who have been pros. Some guys just underneath that level maybe didn't get the opportunity. So, and he stood out amongst. There was lots of good players on the field, but I think it's an idea, and obviously the answer will be, we don't have the money for it. But I think actually there's a bit of a spring in the step of the club game, and anything we can do to keep driving that forward now, keep fueling it, I think will be positive, Wesley.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for people who are wondering, Jesus, like Conor Hayes is in your daughter's year in school. What age is Wesley? You did have Jade when you were about 12, Wes. So just to put it on the record there. So
I didn't have her at all, actually.
Right, final thoughts this weekend, gentlemen. Yeah.
Excuse me. Before you leave, you have noted who's after slipping into 5th place. Just one outside the playoffs. Yeah. I noticed no mention of the Cons this week.
Well, listen, we wait and see.
You talk about us when we lose.
We wait and see.
I tell you, when you talk about the quality, and let's be honest, there's because the province is having the game for 5 weeks. There's a lot of young fellas are now being released out of the academy and the development, fully contracted players to play in the club game. And in the last 2 weeks, it's been brilliant. We played Trinity last week. Jack Dunn, my God, I didn't realise just how big this guy is. Leinster second row. Sheridan, you remember, is it Harry Sheridan? Sheridan played in the under-20s. Remember for Ireland?
Hayman.
No, Hayman was second.
No. He's Ulster. He's in the Ulster Academy out of Trinity.
Oh, yeah.
He was absolutely outstanding. Rob Russell, another one over the Leinster.
Well, in that Lansdowne Munsters game, like for example, at one point you had Peter Dooley at loosehead from Lansdowne.
Harry Sheridan.
Harry Sheridan.
Keenan Knox at tight head. Two guys who you're thinking maybe can step up fully, getting to go against each other with such an incentive on the line. It's so much more valuable than what the alternatives have been the last few years.
Yeah,
but you talk to the young fellas, Wes, and I spoke to Sheridan after the game, and obviously speaking to our own fellas. They're absolutely thrilled. Some of them were given the option of having a week off or play a match. They couldn't wait to get up and get involved, which is brilliant. Jack Crowley now played in the last 2 games. Sean French played. Liam O'Connor, a prop, he's played 1 game. I think he might be available in the next weekend or so. But they're absolutely just crying out for game time. Now, the only thing that drives me mad, it's a bit of a marriage of convenience at the moment because the provinces have nowhere else to get game time for these fellas. They're loading them all back into the AIL. But the minute they get A matches against somebody in Wales or England, they'll just run out of the clubs as fast as possible. There has to be give and take on both sides. The quality that they have added to the league in the past couple of weeks has been brilliant. And hopefully, as a consequence of this exercise during this 5-week window, they'll become to realise that there is value in releasing these lads to play in some highly competitive games.
Just on that, Donal, you mentioned guys mad keen to play. I remember hearing a story about Dan Sheehan. It's probably about 16 months ago, and Leinster had said to him, you need to you know, take 2 weeks off now. You need to go away. All the rest of the academy players were going away. And he insisted on playing for Lansdowne. He went in and argued his case. I want to play for my club. I want to play for my club. And he was obviously outstanding for that. Now, 16 months later, he's on the bench for Ireland. I mean, you know, those young lads will never go wrong looking to play games. And I think it's a great experience for them, mixing with lads who are doing it 2 nights a week, etc. The quality's good. There's a bit of spotlight on it. And I agree, there is some A games scheduled for this month. And I just hope, I can see the need for the provinces to get a game together before they go back, but I'd hate to see them miss real opportunities to get some consistency as well in the club game.
Yeah. I think actually, Bert, I think as far as I know, I think Keenan Knox actually kind of presented himself to Munsters during the week last week as well. It wasn't something that was forced by Munster. I think he went to the club and said, I really want to play this weekend. They put him on the bench and he came on, so just backs it up the point.
Yeah. Brilliant, lads. All right, look, enjoy the game against Japan this weekend. It's a 1 o'clock kick-off, so nice and early, get a few points after, and hopefully the Aviva will be absolutely buzzing. It hasn't been sold out up until today at time of recording on Thursday, but hopefully there's a bit of a late burst on tickets, and it turns out to be an entertaining game. It's live on RTÉ television, on RTÉ radio, and online as well, wherever you get your rugby this weekend. Enjoy the match. We'll talk to you next week, then. Enjoy.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.